Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a webinar from TUC Education. Today's webinar is going to be about protecting workers' mental health. I'm Anna from the TUC, and I'm delighted to be joined by two other speakers at the moment, and hopefully we'll be joined by a third very shortly. We've got Andrea Oates from the Labour Research Department, and we have got Anne Marie Powell, who is a Unite rep. I'll be getting them to talk a little bit more about their roles in a second. But first of all, I think we've got a lot of first-time webinar viewers today, so very big welcome to you. And just to explain a little bit about how our webinars work. You can see on the right-hand side, there's a chat panel, and it's great to see some of you already introducing yourselves. Please use that to exchange any tips and ideas that you might have about this issue. You'll also see some links popping up, both from my colleagues at the TUC and from the Labour Research Department, where Andrea's colleagues will be posting links to some of their publications and reps' support. We will have some time for questions after presentations from our panel. You can post a question to our panel using the Ask a Question button, which is at the bottom of the screen. We will try and get through as many of the questions as we can, but just in case we don't get through them all, please don't worry. We take all questions into consideration when we're putting reps guidance out there. There's also a live transcript option. There's a green button underneath the videos. If you click that, we will you'll be able to view live captions for the video, and it'll open in a new window. Today's event is being recorded. We will send a link of the recording to everyone who's registered on this webinar, along with any resources that we, the panel, talk about or that might be recommended in the chat at the side. As I said, we do have a third speaker who I'm going to try and get on whilst once we get going. So please don't worry if all of a sudden there's four faces on the screen. Right, so today's subject is protecting workers' mental health. Now, last week, as many of you will know, was Mental Health Awareness Week, and there was lots of awareness raising and a lot of events around this issue. We all know that mental health is a subject that's being talked about a lot more nowadays than it used to be, and that's fantastic. But it doesn't mean that mental health is necessarily improved, and there's still a long way to go in the workplace and out to improve people's mental health. So there's obviously a role here for workplace reps to hold management to account to improve those situations. So first of all, to talk about some of the background to this, I'm gonna ask Andrea Oates from the LRD a few questions about this issue. So first of all, Andrea, can you just tell us a little bit about what the LRD does and what you're going to tell us about today? And then I'll ask you some more specific questions about mental health at work.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many people joining the webinar. So I'm one of the Labour Research Department's writers, and I suppose we provide information for trade unions, written from a trade union perspective by trade unionists. So we produce 2 monthly magazines, Labour Research and Workplace Report. Workplace Report, as the name suggests, is kind of particularly focused at negotiators. And then we also publish around 10 booklets a year. And the most recent one that we've brought out, I don't know if this is going to come out backwards on screens or whatever, but our booklet that comes out this month is on stress and mental health at work, a guide for trade unions and working people. And I suppose the booklets kind of deal with a particular topic, in this case, stress and mental health at work, in more detail than we would, kind of provide in a labour research feature, although, that we kind of regularly will cover, those sort of topics in news and features as well. And the information for the booklet, so we contact, all the TUC, or the kind of biggest TUC affiliated trade unions, talk to their union health and safety specialists who are, kind of very knowledgeable and helpful people and ask them for information about, what they're doing at national level. But we also have a network of workplace contacts, and they provide information for us in terms of what, they're practically doing in workplaces, how they've taken the guidance that unions are providing at national level and actually put some of that guidance into practice and negotiated agreements around things like mental health in their workplaces.
Thanks, Andrea. That was a really great intro. And I'm also really pleased to say that Helen has joined us now, and we'll be coming to her shortly to talk about the steps she made in her workplace. So Helen, fantastic to see you. And we're just hearing from Andrea at the LRD at the moment. So Andrea, can you talk about some of the practical steps that reps should think about when negotiating a mental health policy, please?
Yeah, so I suppose kind of, if you're thinking about starting from, kind of square one, I think it's really important to be aware, particularly for safety reps, to kind of, be aware about their rights. And obviously other union reps have rights under the Trade Union and Labour Relations Consolidation Act to kind of around collective bargaining rights and information rights, but I think the safety reps are kind of key to kind of taking action on workplace mental health. And yeah, I suppose one thing I did want to say was that I think the stress and mental health booklet very much kind of focuses on tackling stress as well as providing support for mental health in the workplace. So that's not to say that's not to say that mental health support's not important, but unions talk, well, for example, USDOR's General Secretary Paddy Lillis has made very clear that poor work's not just contributing to stress, anxiety and depression, it's actually causing it. Prospect says that employers are increasingly aware that mental health is an important workplace issue and provide sort of wellbeing support services, but while this is important, too few are putting similar resources into considering and tackling the ways in which the workplace causes mental ill health. So I think that kind of, it's really important to, I suppose, be aware of your rights and then also think about, think about workplace mental health in terms of tackling the causes in the workplace. What is it about work that's actually causing mental health problems at work? And also, I suppose, kind of, the union guidance is very much around seeing this as a collective, not an individual problem. So there's a really good report that came out from the Rail Industry Safety Board, which talks about, it's kind of all very well to provide things like yoga and fruit bowls, but actually, it's much more important for employers to focus on workplace factors that they can directly influence. So I suppose in terms of kind of, what steps to take, as I say, be clear about the law in terms of your own rights and your employer's duties to take action around mental health. So that's in terms of health and safety legislation, like the management regulations that require employers to carry out risk assessments, and that includes, the mental health hazards, and I suppose sort of gathering evidence about the extent of the problem. So whether that's sort of generally, and we know that COVID, we had a mental health crisis before COVID, and that's exacerbated a kind of work-related mental health crisis. It's just made things like, if you look at workloads or kind of home working brings a whole lot of kind of stresses to bear. As I say, I think taking a collective preventative approach is really important. And yeah, I suppose the other thing is, as I say, LRD gathers together information from trade unions right across the TUC affiliates. And there's unions have put out loads and loads of really helpful guidance to reps, particularly to safety reps, but to Unison, for example, have got a really good guide around, to branches. So, how kind of reps from all different reps, not just safety reps, but equality reps and union reps can all work together within a branch to kind of, put mental health on the bargaining agenda, or collective bargaining table or whatever. But I think also, look at what other unions have put out, because there's lots of, you're going to hear from reps from Unite and the FDA today talking about some of the things that they've done. But, unions also put out a lot of information about how their reps have tackled this issue. That's, really good examples. And just to, the NEU has got a really good example of what they did at Gordano School, where they, that was around sort of addressing workload to sort of, they've got issues with stress and mental health around high workloads. And that's quite a nice case study about what they did, including sort of carrying out indicative ballots for industrial action and threatening industrial action, which they didn't actually have to take in the end, but to kind of get some negotiations going around tackling some of the causes of mental ill health. Is that okay?
That's brilliant, Andrea. Thank you for that sort of great overview of why these policies are important. And I think there's some really key points you mentioned there that I know that Helen and Anne Marie will be returning to and referencing when they talk about the practical experience they've had in their workplaces of negotiating and implementing these. Okay, so can you talk a little bit about why it's important to take a collective and preventative approach rather than the individual method, which perhaps has been used a lot recently?
Yeah, so I think it's, union guidance makes very clear that, that's mental health, work-related mental health problems at work. It's not an individual problem. It's, unions kind of, and the TUC advise against things like resilience training, and I've mentioned the study in the rail industry that talks about, avoiding gimmicks like yoga and fruit bowls that aren't going to make any difference. And I think it's, much more effective to be looking at tackling mental health problems at work by taking a collective approach. So a lot of unions guidance talks about, kind of organising through sort of taking action on mental health. So I suppose like a kind of virtual circle that, the stronger you are in the workplace, you're more likely to be able to, have the kind of strength to push the employer to take action. But as I say, a lot of, I suppose employers might say, well, this is, mental health, it's kind of individuals bringing things to work that are, nothing to do with work. It's kind of issues in their private life to do with, relationship breakdowns or debt or, all those sort of things. But actually, a lot of those things are related to work. So even if if it's things like, people are worried about debt, it's, because they're not being paid enough. So there's a kind of, a very sort of strong argument that unions make around, more general, having decent, well-paid, work will address some of those problems that people are experiencing.
Thanks, Andrea. So can you now just give us, say, your top 3 things that you think a mental health policy should include? I know there may be more than 3, but I'm just a bit aware of time. So if you just tell us your top 3 for now, and we'll come back to the others a bit later.
Yeah, so I suppose just continuing with that sort of collective preventative approach. So I think that, a mental health policy should include a commitment to address the causes of work-related mental ill health, whether that's long hours or heavy workloads, unreasonable deadlines, poor management, job insecurity, some of the things that the health and safety executive as well as unions identify as being issues that are the causes of mental ill health in the workplace. I think trade union involvement is really key. So as I've said, I think, you know, safety reps have got, you know, more rights around kind of tackling stress and mental health problems. But obviously, you know, if you're in a workplace where you've got, you know, good trade union density organisation, and you can kind of, you know, push for involvement for other groups of workers like equality reps. But I think trade union involvement's really key. And just in case I forget to say this later, the CWU have done a lot of work, I think Unite as well, but with Royal Mail. They've got a really kind of detailed mental health strategy that includes preventative work around carrying out risk assessments, but also provides mental health support, including mental health first aid training for managers and for reps, but all the way through their, you know, the agreement that they've got there on kind of around stress and mental health. There's kind of every step of the way there is union involvement, you know, down to sort of from national level down to kind of workplace level. And I think that's a kind of good example of a kind of policy that's been negotiated that takes a preventative collective approach, addresses stress, but also provides support. And you know, support for workers is important, but I think also training, and a lot of unions have talked about you know, the importance of kind of line managers having proper training, both to be able to sort of spot the signs of mental ill health, but also actually to be able to do something about it in terms of changing people's you know, the way that people work, whether that's long hours, workloads, deadlines, etc. They, you know, they've got power to do something about it. Yeah, so you know, kind of that training in mental health awareness throughout the organisation, but including line managers, I think is important.
Thank you for that really nice holistic overview, I think, Andrea, that includes so many different issues from across that reps need to consider from across the workplace. Okay, I think we're going to move on to Helen in just a second, but there's one question that's been posted that I'm going to answer. It's just asking if we've got any guidance about how to tackle long COVID in the workplace. Absolutely, the TUC has produced a e-learning guide. I will ask my colleagues to post a link to it in the chat because I won't be able to find it and do this at the same time. So look out in the chat in a second for a link to the long COVID training. We'll also include it in any resources we send round later today. So I'm now turning to Helen. Helen, thank you so much for bearing with us and joining with the little technical issues we had at the start. So Helen is a rep with the FDA. She's also works for the CPS, and she's got some really great information to tell us about negotiating a policy within her workplace to protect against mental health issues. So Helen, over to you, please.
Hello. I just wanted to make sure, first of all, that you can hear me okay, bearing in mind I've had some technical issues. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Helen Wheatley. I'm a senior Crown prosecutor with Yorkshire and Humberside Crown Prosecution Service, but I split my time between doing that day job, but I'm also the national lead for the FDA CPS section on health and safety. So in that second role as a union rep, I have been dealing for a number of years with personal cases where we've had members, predominantly members who I come across who have already gone off sick with work-related stress. And it was quite clear that the organisation initially was dealing with those individual members of staff very much on the basis that it was they that had the issue rather than the organisation. But it was clear from dealing with personal cases, but also in my view as the health and safety national lead, that I was able to get from my employer very detailed information about absence levels across the service that I work for in terms of a grade and also from the area's point of view. So it basically meant that I was beginning to build up a picture that it wasn't just individual members of staff, perhaps working out of the Newcastle Crown Court team, that were having a particular issue. You could actually see from the data that the organisation was giving me that it was across all grades, across all teams, and across the country as a whole, that stress was rising. So having got that information from the employer, it then informed negotiations going forward, and also allowed me the opportunity to see quite clearly that this wasn't just an individual issue, this was endemic in the organisation, and that the organisation, in conjunction with the departmental trade unions, needed to do something about it. So I did spend a lot of my time initially having a look to see what else was out there in relation to other trade unions, in relation to what other organisations were doing when it came to looking after the mental health and well-being of staff, and in particular whether or not there were any policies already out there that we could use and adapt in our organisation that could deal with stress. And luckily, the NHS individual trusts had an awful lot of information, a lot of self-diagnostic tools that, again, were really helpful in being able to get people to identify themselves whether or not they were suffering from stress, and also for line managers to be able to look at whether people that they were line managing were showing some of the signs of stress. So, having done a lot of my own research and a lot of digging around, I was then able to go back to my own union colleagues and say, this is the problem that we've got. I think it's endemic in the organisation. This is what other people in other organisations are doing. I think we need to be able to take our employer to task on this. But employers being employers, they never really want to do anything unless you're able, from a union point of view, to be able to show that it's a win-win for both sides. So again, using their own data and turning it back on them, I was able to say, this is something that you should be doing, because actually you're losing a significant number of staff here to sickness that could be avoided if we had our own policy and procedures to be able to, first of all, stop people going off sick in the first place, and secondly, be able to support people who are absent from work with work-related stress issues and support them back into the workplace. That was quite a challenging conversation to have, if I'm honest, but the ongoing industrial relations that we have with our employers are pretty good. So being able to make those targeted conversations with people outside formal meetings and effectively get some key members of management on board, first of all, actually helped us in the negotiations going forward. It was also, again, quite helpful to be in a position of being able to say, this is what's happening in other parts of government or other parts of the public sector. And I was able to contact some union colleagues who were already using stress policies in their workplace to ask them how they'd done it and to ask them what was effective. So that when we were able to persuade our employers to come to the table and start negotiations on a policy, we were able to have live data as well as our own data about the effectiveness of these policies. Now, I have to confess, our policy came in the autumn, in the Easter of 2019. And the problem that we've had in terms of the effectiveness of the policies and the tools that have gone with it is the pandemic struck us in March 2020. And it's been very difficult to see whether the policies themselves have been applied effectively and whether or not it's had a real significance on absentee levels. We're still monitoring that situation. Unfortunately, you'll probably be aware there's massive backlogs in the criminal justice system. And that has caused a massive increase in the numbers of cases that are going through the courts. So we've had a real issue in terms of our day job with the amount of work that's coming in. So it's been very difficult to see the effectiveness of the policy in terms of how it's embedded and how it's reacted in terms of overall absence levels. That said, both myself and a number of my other colleagues that are doing personal cases have certainly seen the impact of the policy in terms of individual risk assessments, supporting members during absence meetings, and being able to develop stress risk assessments and appropriate work adjustment passports for people suffering from stress. So all in all, it was challenging. There was a lot of research that we needed to do beforehand. But as I indicated earlier, if you can tell and show your employer that actually it's not just the union whinging about things, it's the union trying to get you on board to create a more positive working environment and to address what I consider to be a health and safety issue. Stress is not just an individual issue, it's an organisational issue, but it's a health and safety issue. And once you start to have those conversations with your employer, you can often find that they can see the light and realise it's something that they need to address.
Thank you so much, Helen. That was incredibly interesting. And I think you made some really interesting points about, even though your policy might not be fully implemented yet, there are still parts of it that are benefiting your colleagues and benefiting members across your workforce in their mental health. And I think, really crucially, you've emphasised here that it's about working together with management to improve the workplace for all. It's win-win, and it's often the way to get management on side. We're getting some great questions posted, and I will come to those shortly. But first of all, we've got Anne Marie, who is a Unite rep, and she's also been involved in policy negotiation in her workplace. So we're going to just move over to Anne Marie to hear about what she has achieved at her workplace, which is a local government, but I can't remember where. I'm really sorry. Is it Cheshire?
Okay. It is. It's Cheshire.
I remembered.
First of all, thank you, Andrea and Helen. I personally found both of your presentations, chats, extremely useful. In fact, I was making notes throughout, so thank you. So yes, I'm Anne Marie. I work for Cheshire West and Chester Council. I'm actually a waste officer within the waste management department, but I am also the workplace rep for Unite the Union. So a bit like Helen, I've been involved in various cases which have exposed me to mental health, and so mental health is very important to me. It's something that I want to make sure is constantly on the agenda, and I have to say it is with Cheshire West and Chester Council. What I will say first of all is, if you hear me refer to Cheshire West and Chester Council as quack, I am not a duck. That's just what we use for ourselves there. So I will try my hardest, but I'm not a duck. So yes, I've been asked to just give you a very brief overview of what we've done as trade unions and what's going on within the local authority there. And as I've just said to you, quack are very active. In my opinion, they work really well with trade unions. We have a lot of meetings, and health, I keep referring to as health and safety, but that's because I'm a little bit nervous, apologies. Mental health and well-being is on the top of the agenda, and that's pushed from both sides. As a trade union, I'm constantly shouting up about it. Now, Andrea mentioned, since COVID-19, mental health in particular has gone through the roof, and one thing that we're very conscious of and we're shouting up as trade unionists is 70% of our workforce for quack now work at home, and that's something that we're conscious about, and we're wanting to make sure that they're being looked after too. So what we've worked with quack in doing is implementing what we call an Our Wellbeing Matters scheme. And that will see and does see the council making a commitment, which is what Andrew was talking about, that actually in all of their decision making, the well-being is a factor in that. And what they want to be doing is looking at the behaviours and the cultures from management downwards, and making sure that well-being along with mental health is being covered. So a couple of examples I could give you with that, where I've worked with them as well, is the return back to work form or procedure that's in place. Usually it'd be how many days you've been off or reason that you've been off is the first sort of opening questions. Now the first question is, how are you? Because that's what matters really. You know, the individual in that situation, they're what matter. That forms about them. So and again, that's been implemented in other areas of the business, child services, for example, where their environment and working conditions can be quite stressful. If there's any kind of incident that's happened, they will be asked that in that first question, but also they will pick that up in a few days later as well, make sure they keep referring back to them. Another example is the stress risk assessment, and this is what I've worked on personally. So I had a case and we had to do a stress risk assessment, and I kid you not, it was about 100 questions, which for somebody that's feeling stressed or anxious, whether it's work related, outside of work and whatnot, it's not really the sort of situation you want. So I highlighted that in one of the various meetings that we have, and I'm working with health and safety and our HR department to try and improve that and consolidate that basically. And I have to say, just on that point as well, we do have regular meetings as trade unionists with up to corporate level. We have working groups, we work with different departments, with the HR. You know, we are all trying to communicate and talk about this. What we are, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to refer back to my notes. What has also happened and been implemented is through public health funding, we now have 16 new mental health first aiders across all areas of the business as well. That we are looking to try and put more in place. When I say we, Quack are looking to put more in place, but they're asking if trade unions can help. So if there's any pots of funding that we can get hold of to try and help with that as well. They're offering a range of courses online, which are available to everybody. So whether you're a frontline worker or director, they're insisting that you go on and do that. And that's things like mindfulness, identifying stress and anxiety. They're trying to work with the local sports leisure centres as well, to do courses via them or exercise classes through them. They've recently done some online for the frontline workers. And another example as well, a lot of my guys that I represent do work on the front line. They've recently just been involved in a rugby match to raise focus for men's mental health. That is in collaboration with Quack and ourselves. So yes, it's about for Quack in particular, and what this Our Wellbeing Matters scheme is all about is making sure that that mental health and well-being is on the top of the agenda, which I appreciate I've repeated, but it is going to be involved in every decision making. They're making commitments to their staff, and they are trying, I think, to try and change the culture and how we approach that. I will continue to work with them. Mental health is so important. It's the illness that you can't necessarily always say, but it does affect everybody in one form or another. So yes, I hope that that's okay, and I kind of give you a brief overview of what's going on at Cheshire West and Chester Council and what we've been involved in as trade unionists. Thanks everyone.
That's been fantastic, Anne Marie. Thank you so much for telling us about the work you've been doing. I'm going to turn now to some of the questions that we've had submitted, both while we've been broadcasting, but also that have been sent in advance. So Helen and Anne Marie, you've both talked about, actually you as well, Andrea, but you've all talked about getting information from your colleagues about mental health in order to find out what's going on, in order to present evidence to management, to build a case, etc. And Anne Marie, I don't know whether you saw in the chat, but you mentioned that the first question on your survey is, how are you? And people have said it's amazing how obvious that is, that it's just, you know, how are you? We say it 20 times a day, but it should be on this kind of survey. But just to expand on this point a bit more, if a branch wanted to send out a mental health questionnaire, what key tips, advice, or even examples other than the how are you have you got that they might be able to use? And are there any other monitoring questions that you might ask on this same questionnaire about, for example, job title, gender, level in the organisation, that sort of thing? Helen, why don't we go to you first, just to give Anne Marie a bit of a break while she maybe has some water.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good. All good.
Can you hear me? Brilliant. Sorry, I'm having some technology issues, so I do apologise, colleagues. Questionnaires, I tend to find are of very limited use, if I'm honest, especially in a working environment where people are really busy. You tend to find that they don't bother filling them in, so that's not particularly helpful. I think in relation to diagnosing stress, there are some really good tools that are on the internet and are available, and we've certainly incorporated that into our own policy. And they're self-diagnostic tools, but they're also tools in relation to line managers, or indeed colleagues, can actually use if they think there's somebody in their team who is not acting as they would do normally. And I think it's very difficult when it comes to stress. I think there is this natural tendency to soldier on because you don't want to let the side down. And there is also this idea, again, that management will think that you are weak, or you have an issue, and you could potentially be a troublemaker if you try and raise the issue yourself. So it's a complicated scenario. How it's worked in our organisation, I think, is that we, together with our management, have tried to create a more open environment that people feel happier to be able to talk about their own mental well-being, and I think that's key. But going forward with a policy, I think it's really important that there are self-diagnostic tools in that policy that people can be referred to, and they can complete them on an individual basis. Because it does seem to me that whilst we don't want to kind of blame the individual and say it's their problem, we do have to tread carefully, I think, when it comes to people's individual mental health, because we could potentially be in a position where colleagues could get upset and very irritated if other colleagues are saying, we think you've got a problem. So it's quite a delicate issue, I think, and surveys, I personally feel, are not particularly helpful in addressing that.
Okay, thanks for that, Helen. That's a really interesting take, especially as you said that people sometimes are inundated with surveys, they might be too busy and they're not going to get the information that you want. But Anne Marie, has it been different perhaps in your workplaces? Every workplace is going to be a bit different on this, and in some places it might work, in some places it might not. Have you got any examples where it has worked, and maybe the sort of information that you're gathering?
I think, like you've just mentioned there, each workplace is different, and particularly with Cheshire West and Chester Council, they've got different areas. So with child services, they've identified that it's, much more stressful environment. So they do follow-ups, and it's not necessarily questionnaires. It could just be sit down, have a cup of tea, and let's have a chat about it. But then for the frontline workers who are not used to sitting in front of teams, or, you know, not necessarily used to opening up to anybody. They've put sports events on with a follow-up sort of thing and just got the feedback from there, or coffee mugs. So I think you do have to identify who you are talking to. A good way, I know surveys aren't for everybody, but sometimes if you do a rating on, you know, 1 to 10, how you feeling today, and, you know, what the tasks that you've took upon yourself, how would you mark them and stuff, it's always a good marker to come back on as well. So yeah, I think just identifying who you're talking to and the approach that you take that's best suited, really.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Also, Helen, you mentioned some of these self-diagnostic tools that you would recommend. Maybe not now, but if you're able to send us links to them afterwards, we can include it in the resources that we send out to registrants. Fantastic, because quite a few people are asking for them. Right, I'm going to have a question for Andrea now. So we're seeing some examples of post-COVID, post the pandemic peak. We're seeing examples of employers and management generalizing mental health or poor mental health as the norm. Is this something you've also seen at the LRD, and have you got any advice for reps facing that?
No, I mean, I've not had that sort of reported from reps, although I suppose we've kind of been asking for, you know, when I've asked workplace contacts for information, I suppose I'm sort of after best practice, you know, although they do tell us about bad practice. But I think, I mean, we shouldn't be accepting it as the norm. You know, and I think when we were putting the booklet together, we were also sort of trying to, you know, there's some examples in there of, you know, what a mentally healthy workplace should look like. You know, and there's union guidance about what good practice looks like. So I think we shouldn't be, you know, we should definitely not be accepting that it's the norm. I mean, I think, you know, right at the beginning we talked about there being a mental health crisis, but I don't think it's one that we should kind of accept that there's nothing that employers can do about it. And I was just sort of, you know, I'm really conscious of kind of referring to the same unions over and over again or whatever. So apologies, people who aren't in the NEU, because, you know, there's lots of good guidance out there. But they kind of did put something together about a stress risk assessment, saying that school staff are unlikely to suffer from work-related stress if they can cope with the demands of their job, understand their role, have a say in how they work, feel supported by management, and have positive working relationships, including in times of change. And so I think it kind of goes back to that kind of wider argument about, you know, having decent work, really, that they, you know, obviously is a major demand from the TUC and unions. Yeah, so I suppose that's quite a long, you know, long answer to no, we shouldn't accept it, and we should be, you know, pushing for work that doesn't make us ill.
Absolutely, Andrew. I think that last sentence is the really key point there. Work shouldn't make us ill. And, you know, if you do get an employer or management that say it's post-COVID, this is the norm now, this is the new normal, that perhaps that can be a phrase that we can use. Okay, I'm eager to move on to some of the other questions that we've had. Right, so we've got one here. So just one moment, I'm just trying to scroll through all the different questions we've got. Okay, so Helen and Anne Marie again. In your situation as, you know, your workplace reps, is there a danger that reps can get a bit bogged down by this? They're taking on the troubles of others. And yeah, you're nodding already, Helen. We get a lot of feedback when we talk to reps and when we survey reps that their own mental health and well-being can sometimes suffer, not just with regards to when they're dealing with mental health as a wider issue, but just when they're maybe doing regular casework. Have you got any advice for reps who might be feeling the pressure a bit in that situation? Helen, let's hear from you first.
I'm very lucky that I've got a set of colleagues, union colleagues, who are always available to have conversations with. And I think you're right. I think as a union rep, you end up having to almost become like a doctor or a professional, in the sense that you're often managing people's expectations. You're often dealing with them in times of distress, and you've got to try and develop a level of professional detachment so that you can leave other people's problems at work. And it's not easy to do that, but I think key to being able to do that is being able to have frank conversations with your other union reps. If you're not sure about something, to be able to go and either speak to your full-time national officials, or even speak to colleagues who are in other unions, because a lot of the time problems that you're getting are certainly problems that other reps are having in other workplaces. So I think that's really important, to be able to have your own support network as a rep. And again, I think you also need to have a certain level of awareness with your own health and well-being. Again, there is very much a temptation of taking on more than you should be doing. And I've found that my trigger has been a situation where I was just picking up all sorts of bugs and coughs and colds and things because I was run down and I was overworking. So it's those classic signs, I think, of being in touch with yourself and realizing when you are doing too much, being in a position where you've got colleagues around you who you can talk to, and that old adage of being able to say no. When somebody refers something to you and you know you've got too much on, don't be afraid to say no.
Fantastic advice there, Helen. And I think especially really important to remember that as a workplace rep, you're not alone. Hopefully a lot of you will already be aware of the TUC and the website unionreps.org.uk. It's a bulletin board discussion forum where, literally, just as Helen said, you can get support from fellow reps. We are looking to expand and improve that later this year, but it's still running at the moment. We'll post a link to it in the chat panel, so that you can take a look at that. Anne Marie, have you got anything to add to what Helen said about, taking on the burden yourself as a workplace rep?
I think what I'm going to say is pretty much going to mirror what Helen's just said there. It's about making sure you have a network around you, and whether that's your regional officer or I'm doing a course at the moment through Unite, and I often call up my tutor sometimes just to get a source of information, make sure I've done things right, even sometimes just to offload. I've got great working relationships with other unions. We might represent different unions, but we are united as such in what we do. I guess from a personal level, sometimes you do get caught up in cases. I know I do, and I really just want the best outcome, or I do take it on, but it's learning to, as Helen said, say no, or to close that door and leave that there. But it does take time. The best thing you can ever do is just talk. Use the people around you and talk about it.
Thanks, Anne Marie. I think we've probably got time for 2 more questions. I'm going to pose the next one to Andrea, where someone has asked, or a few people have mentioned this actually, saying that employers often talk about supporting mental health and may or may not have a policy, but they can sometimes decouple workplace issues from the overall the overall individual. And this may lead us back to this issue of resilience that we've all touched upon, you've all touched upon in your presentations. Have you, in your research, got any positive examples of where this has been challenged? And if so, how it came about? Or do you know of anything that's underway in this area where a union has successfully challenged decoupling of this in the workplace?
Oh, I'm not sure that I have actually. I mean, I've seen, you know, kind of union and TUC guidance sort of arguing against a resilience approach. You know, as I say, union guidance is very much about taking a collective preventative approach. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can give you a kind of, you know, an example or a case study of where a particular workplace or a particular union's, you know, been able to push back. I mean, I suppose it's one of those things that, you know, unions are kind of arming their reps with, you know, the arguments about how to, you know, how to push back about, you know, just sort of flagging up awareness about, you know, beware of this individualistic approach, beware of the resilience approach. It's not about making, you know, it shouldn't be about workers kind of, you know, making individuals more resilient to kind of, you know, withstand unreasonable demands. It's about, you know, kind of getting the employer to make changes. And I suppose some of those examples I've given, you know, like at Gordano's school where they've, yeah, I mean, I know people have been sort of arguing against doing surveys, but I mean, they did include a survey there to kind of just gather some evidence and I think get people on board. And I suppose, you know, if it's not, if you make it so it's not a really long drawn out boring survey, it is a way of kind of encouraging people to get involved, and it's part of organising, I suppose. Yeah, so I'm not sure I can give you a kind of specific example of where a union kind of rejected that, but I think it's about, you know, making sure you're armed with information, you know, you're kind of prepared with guidance from unions to sort of challenge those kind of arguments coming up. Yeah, so I'm not sure I've answered that question very well, but
no, that's fine, Andrea. No worries at all. I appreciate that surveys or gathering information and gathering evidence is still crucial, whether or not a survey is used. That's the key point, isn't it? It's in order to present evidence and information to management when negotiating these things. There was quite a funny comment a while back when people were talking about surveys, saying that some people were nervous about going to a loo in case they get surveyed about the quality of the toilet roll. So, you know, that made me smile. We've all got survey fatigue at the moment, perhaps a little bit. Okay, a question that's a little bit different now, that perhaps is included within policies that have already been negotiated, but is, I think, part of a wider health and safety at work issue as well. That often we describe mental health in much the same way as physical ailments, and individuals may seem healthy and they're deemed healthy based on whether or not they can return to work. And we all know that that often isn't the same. So as union members, what are ways that we can challenge this attitude? Because it means that workers might be forced to return to work far too soon. So why don't we just go to you first, Anne Marie, this time?
Oh no, hi. So you are right, and as I think I actually mentioned it, mental health is the one illness that you can't necessarily see because sometimes the symptoms aren't physical. And I think an employer has, I think we've all got a duty of care, to be honest, to make sure that when somebody is absent from work, and if it is in particularly related to mental health, that there are systems or support put in place for them. You know, you can do the likes of a stress risk assessment. I wouldn't do the old version at Quack though, because you'll be there all day. But you know, asking questions, making sure you are checking in regularly from a union point of view with your members, you know, insisting that is happening from management level as well, regular breaks, you know. What we don't want them to do, first of all, they shouldn't be coming back if they're not ready to, and we need to make that crystal clear. Even as union reps, we need to be expressing that to them. We need to make sure that they are aware of all the channels available to them, you know, whether that's through their employer or, you know, crisis talks and things like that, teams that you can talk to and things like that. But yeah, I think if we could try and implement things in place for them, regular breaks, sitting down having a cup of tea, just so they're not feeling so alone or not carrying the burden, and encourage them obviously to go and speak to their doctor as well, which they might not necessarily always want to do, but I do think it's good to talk.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Helen, I can see you've just posted something in the chat about phased returns with adjustments are very helpful. Did you want to just expand on that at all?
Yes, I think you're right. I think it's true whether it's a physical disability or it's a mental disability. We often have people who can come back and do something rather than being on full-time sick. And I think certainly in the public sector, where we have horrendous issues with backlogs, it's much better to have somebody doing, in my particular line of work, 4 cases a day than they're not doing any cases at all. But I think it's really important that if we've got somebody with a mental health issue who feels that coming back to work is something that they're ready to do, we need to make sure that they don't come back, break down very quickly and then go off again, because that is likely to do longer term damage than trying to come back and make a failed attempt back into work. So then I think as a union rep, it's really important to have those honest conversations with somebody coming back and to set realistic goals with that member. Because the amount of conversations I've had with a member who said, yes, I'm fit to come back and I should be fine. And that, they've been off for 4 months. When you first spoke to them, they were in a position where they couldn't even get out of bed in the morning. That coming back in one big chunk, coming back to do their full contracted hours, coming back doing their usual caseload is something that is that they're just not equipped to do. So you need to have those realistic conversations. You need to support them through that. And I take my role as a union rep, as a conduit really with the manager, to often raise things with the manager that the members themselves don't want to raise or don't feel able to raise. So I think it goes back to having those realistic expectations, but also getting line managers to really see the benefits of having somebody back doing something rather than having them continuing to be off sick. Occupational health again is important too. My employer tends to take far more notice of things if there's an occupational health report that backs that up, and there are some good workplace adjustments contained in that report.
Thanks for those points, Helen. Really helpful. And one of the viewers has posted in the chat that they felt doing a little was beneficial to their mental health. So, like you said, better to come back and do something than perhaps nothing, and that will help everyone. Right, an hour has sped by. We've rapidly approached 3 o'clock. So just I think what we'll do is I'll go around each of you and just let you sum up your final thoughts on this issue before we wrap up. So Andrea, just any last couple of things you want to add that perhaps we missed earlier?
Yeah, so I suppose there's just a few things that I kind of wanted to mention. One is Thriving at Work, the report by Farmer and Stevenson a few years ago, that was a government commissioned research around work-related, around mental health and employer support. It costs employees poor mental health results in costs to employers of between 33 billion and 43 billion annually. And so I kind of I think that report's quite useful to look at in terms of kind of, making the case to employers about why they should take action. Also, there's some quite helpful NICE guidelines that came out last year, mental wellbeing at work guideline, which are, they're not mandatory, they're guidance, but as well as looking at union guidance, it might be useful, and also the health and safety executives guidance as well to sort of present to employers. The other things I wanted to say was just, I've been trying to kind of look at some of the questions that are coming up in the chat. I just wanted to flag up that Shelley Asquith, who's the TUC Health and Safety Policy Officer, set up a WhatsApp group for health and safety reps. It's really you know, kind of useful, because it's almost like the kind of chat but it's on all the time, and union reps are kind of constantly posting questions about, you know, problems that they've coming up at work, including sort of mental health issues, you know, and other reps just reply to them with helpful advice about how they've approached it and what's worked and what hasn't worked. The other thing I wanted to flag up is just Hazards campaign, Hazards magazine, Hazards conference is coming up on a hybrid basis from the 29th to the 31st of July. There's a workshop there around stress and mental health, but again, that's a kind of excellent chance to network with lots of other reps and union health and safety specialists, and all sorts of people who are interested in health and safety, and within that mental health, from a kind of right across the sort of union and safety activist movement. So yeah, I'd kind of recommend getting involved in a Hazards campaign if you're not already involved.
Thanks, Andrea. And I think, yeah, I forgot to mention Shelley's WhatsApp group earlier. It is fantastic. I don't think Shelley's on. I think we'd have seen her in the chat if she was, but we'll definitely get information about that to you. Okay, Helen, any final last words?
Yes, stress-related absence is capable of being a personal injury, which is capable of being sued. And I think that's important, not to shy away from from taking action and going to court if you're in a situation where your member's mental health has collapsed as a result of issues with stress. Again, I think it's important to make sure you're keeping really good records, and you should always be advising your members to keep records as well, as far as they're able to do. I would say that, wouldn't I? I'm a lawyer, but don't be afraid to sue.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, that maybe other lawyers wouldn't say it so easily, but sorry, maybe non-lawyers wouldn't say it so easily, but I think it's an excellent point. Thank you for that. And Anne Marie, last words from you?
My advice would be, if you are a workplace rep or a safety rep and you're not doing so already, try to encourage meetings, try to encourage that channel of communication, see what they are actually doing company-wise for mental health. What is your stress risk assessment like, for example, and what are occupational health, if you've got that avenue and stuff like that. So try and explore what is available around you, talk to other companies similar. For myself, for example, it'd be different local authorities to see what they're doing. This is a fantastic forum to use. If anybody wants to get in touch with me afterwards, please feel free to do so. But the best thing you can do really is talk about it, keep it on the agenda, and yeah, use whatever resources are available to you.
Thanks so much, Anne Marie, and actually thank all of you. You've been fantastic today. The feedback that we've got in the chat panel has been brilliant. I hope you've been able to just flick your eyes over once or twice just to see it. A comment a minute or two ago asked if if the TUC would organise some interactive sessions where we could discuss this a bit more. That's definitely something we'll consider. Watch this space. Later this year, it could well be something that we have, not just online. We really enjoy connecting with reps online like this, but we really want to do so face to face again, and we'll be able to do that soon. So thank you again for joining. You've been a fantastic audience, and thank you again to Andrea, Anne Marie, and Helen, although she's disappeared just for now. But we will see you again soon for another webinar, and have a good rest of the week. Bye-bye for now.